Steve Marshall fought that in court. His office fought that in court. It dragged on for a year and a half, almost 2 years. The judge, who was Judge Myron Thompson, he made it clear about last year that he was probably going to rule in the favor of the abortion advocates. But then another 9 months passed. And so then finally they got together. He called a hearing and said, I'm doing it at the end of the month. And he issued his ruling at the end of the month. And it was a sweeping, clear, 100%, almost 100% victory for abortion rights advocates in the state. So now in Alabama, it is again legal. It is now possible. It was probably always legal, but he had his threat. The threat is gone, that he's been blocked, and he hasn't appealed, very importantly. So in Alabama, it is once again possible for former abortion providers and abortion helpers to help get women out of state, to give them information, to give them money, to give them plane tickets, to drive them, whatever they need to access abortion care out of the state. That's now possible again in Alabama.
Alrighty, welcome in. It's your favorite political podcast. It's Alabama Politics This Week with Josh Moon and
David Person.
How are you, David?
Feeling good, man. How about you?
Oh, not too bad. We got a pretty good one for everybody today. We've got Doug Jones on, a former senator, future governor. We got Nina Martin from Reveal coming in to talk about the story of Alabama trying to prosecute abortion helpers in the state and some of the things that went on during that little ordeal. And then you've got us, and I mean really. Us is, I mean, that's why he showed up. So, I mean, those other people are just riffraff. We bring them in to give ourselves a break every now and then from our genius. All right. Speaking of genius, before we get too far into this, I need to tell you about our fine sponsors, the folks that make the show go around, the folks at PCI and Wind Creek Entertainment. We really do appreciate them and all that they do. And speaking of which, we will have Wind Creek Entertainment's own Arthur Mothershed on next week to discuss what has gone on with the tribe and gambling in the state over the last few months of the legislature. Obviously, it failed, and another bill, another run at this thing kind of failed. But also then too to talk about their purchase of the Birmingham race course and what the plans are now that the legislation that they were hoping to pass did not pass in this last legislative session. To just try to see kind of where things stand with them now, what they're going to do. I know they're doing some upgrades. I know it'll be a nice facility, but just see how that kind of affects things. But listen, all that aside, y'all go to Birmingham. They're working on it. They're getting it better. It's going to be a nice place. Already was a nice place under Louis Benefield and the McGregor family. But it was going to be even better. They're going to make some improvements there. But in Wetumpka, Atmore, and Montgomery, they have 3 very nice casinos operating currently. Wetumpka and Atmore have the resorts in those places. Book you a stay. You're not going to regret it. I'm telling you now, it is nice. It's beach season. Everybody's headed to the beach. Stay at the beach at one of the places there. If you're coming from North Alabama, book you a stay in Wetumpka. Stay at the resort there. Your kids will think you're already on vacation. They won't know any better. All right. And really, it's a vacation for you, all of y'all. Okay. Same in Atmore. If you're coming from Birmingham or south from there, book a night in Atmore. Go and break the trip up. Let the kids go to the pool and to the arcade and to the bowling alley. Have a good night. You can play some of the adult games. Everybody eats well. You got all sorts of dining options. There's all sorts of things to do. Y'all look them up online at Wind Creek Entertainment and go and stay. You won't regret it. And we don't regret the partnership here, and would like to see it continue on for years and years and years because they're the best. They really are. They really are the best, and we appreciate what they do here at Alabama Politics This Week, brought to you by Wind Creek Entertainment. So, all righty. Let's see where to begin. Let's start with the coming apocalypse that is on the doorstep. I wrote about this week, and I saw a TikTok video. Okay, and this was while I was at the beach, actually, and my wife saw the same one, and we were talking about it. And she said, "Is this true about the ports and stuff being empty?" And I said, hell, I don't know. No, I'm not a longshoreman. You got no idea. I don't know shit about no port, man. I don't know. I just know the boats come in there. They unload the boats. Listen, I, like a lot of people, watched the second season of The Wire. So, I know that much about ports. I know the Greeks run a lot of drugs through the ports in Baltimore, but that's all I got. Okay. So, I went and looked it up, started looking it up.
It's a great show, too. Great show.
It's the best. It's absolutely the best. McNulty still in the doghouse somewhere. But I just the more I looked, the more worried I became about what I was finding. And really, it was astonishing to me that we're not hearing more about this stuff. Now, I will say, one thing I should point out is a lot of those things that you see on TikToks about the completely empty ports and there's only one boat here and there's one boat. A lot of that stuff is sensationalized. Okay. That's not really true, but it probably is sensationalized to the point that's going to make you worry appropriately about what's about to happen. Okay. Because let me put it into some reality and put that reality into perspective. All right. The reality is right now, according to the folks who run the ports in Seattle and LA, they are experiencing a 30 to 35% reduction in shipments coming in, from China and Asia and the Asian markets. All right. That's a big blow. Okay. Right now, the boats that we're this current week, there is a 28% reduction in Chinese goods coming into the ports on the West Coast. To put that in perspective, during COVID, we had a reduction. If everybody remembers the empty shelves and a lot of things that were going on, I also put this in perspective when I finish. Okay. So we all have an understanding, but that it was at about 7 to 10% of reduction in goods. Okay. So this is going to be a big blow. There's going to be a lot of things missing from shelves that weren't. Now, I mentioned COVID, so let me also put a caveat into that, okay? A lot of the things that we experienced during COVID won't be the same during this, because the things that we experienced during COVID was we had a lot of runs on certain items, okay? Toilet paper, if you remember. Everybody went out and bought toilet paper for some reason. You saw the lines of people with baskets full of toilet paper for no reason at all. Nobody knew why they were buying it. They were just buying it.
That's a primal thing, man.
Yeah,
that's primal.
I guess. I don't know. So we had that, those certain items, disappeared from the shelves and they were empty for a while because there were runs on those certain items. This is going to be a little different. But there are going to be shortages of a lot of different things, furniture and toys and electronics to a certain extent. Because the tariffs were eased on that. However, a lot of folks in China said, the hell with them. We're not doing this. And they started canceling orders. And so we're going to have shortages. We're going to have extremely higher prices on certain items that we didn't have over the last few years. And we're going to have a number of layoffs and reduction in work time for longshoremen, for truckers, right now we're having a problem getting truckers to even travel to the West Coast, because they know if they take a shipment to the West Coast, it's very likely they're not going to have a shipment to bring back.
Wow.
And they don't want to have to, what they call deadhead it back east.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're having problems with that now. Now, we still have shipments on the way to a lot of the East Coast ports from the Asian markets. Those are expected to stop sometime next week. Let's see, what is today? Today is the 7th. Yeah, sometime next week, those will start, and we'll have the same reduction in the number of things coming into those ports. Now, where does that stop? I don't know. Do they make a deal? Does somebody make a deal? Does somebody ease the tariffs? Do we does this thing get solved in some way over the course of the next few days? Maybe, hopefully so. But I can tell you right now that the experts out there, and I'm not talking about some liberals on MSNBC or, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the dude that runs the ports and economic analyst on Bloomberg News and on and that are talking to folks at CNBC and Fox Business News. Those people say that right now, if we had a deal that got done and restored everything back by the end of next week, and everything started flowing again, you're still going to have a disruption of a month or two of product. And so you're still going to have a pretty big problem for a little bit.
One data point that you referenced in your column that I found really kind of mind-blowing, you have here a reference. You say that the CEO of a mobile logistics company told the media that some importers had already paid an additional $30 to $40 million because of the tariffs in the first month, and that expecting them to be able to continue to do that in order to, compensate for the tariffs was just unrealistic.
Yeah.
30 to $40 million.
Yeah. It's
for a month.
Yes. Yeah.
A month worth of tariffs. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And man, what really bothers me the most out of this, okay? Because I think the idea that Trump is selling on these tariffs is, look, hey, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna force these jobs back to America. We're gonna give incentives to businesses to build their plants here and make their products here, and that sounds great. Listen, I thought Sam Walton was a great guy with his Buy America stuff, and his kids are shits, but he was a great guy with his Buy American. I'm only going to buy American products and put it in my stores and do this stuff. And then his kids started with the more global approach to this thing. But we are at a point now where that notion is that reality is dead. Okay. And it's not. I think people look at it when you say that and say, "Oh, they say we can't make it in America and make it better." Well, yeah, no, you can. We could do that, but it's not economically feasible.
Yeah, I was going to say the price is going to go up.
Yeah. It's not even the price. It's like people say, "Well, I don't need anything from China. I won't buy anything." Well, maybe you won't, but we need stuff that makes the products that comes from China. Okay, I mean, we're all in this kind of global market now, and here's the thing about it is we've created an economy that's reliant upon the shipping and importing industry in this country. Okay, I mean, all of those longshoremen, all those truckers, all of the things that we have that move stuff all around the world and around our country, we've built that up. You're talking about millions of jobs. Right. In those industries all across. I mean, think of all the ports. I mean, the port of Mobile, for example. I mean, there's thousands of workers down there that move things through our state, and it's a vital piece of our economy.
Yeah, and I think just I know a longshoreman. He works out in Long Beach, California, I believe, if he hasn't retired yet. And from just some conversations he and I had years ago, I have concluded, Josh, that those are the wrong people to piss off.
Yeah.
Those are the wrong people to disadvantage. You don't want to disadvantage the longshoremen.
No.
You don't want to put them in a position where they're outraged, because they can add to what you're already talking about. They can add to the challenge.
Yeah.
They can add to the challenge by saying, okay, that's it. We're not. They are very organized, and they are very inclined to act in their best interest.
Yeah. Yeah. No, listen, you don't want to piss off the Sabocas, okay? Because, they will, they don't mess around out there, on the docks. No, you're right. They have their unions, the truckers unions, these are big chunks of our economy. They're big driving chunks of our economy. And I just think that, I get it. I get a lot of this, a lot of the patriotism that has so attracted people to the MAGA movement, so things, they built on this nationalism and things. And I think, when people talk about nationalists and stuff, that, it's rightfully in a lot of ways a very negative view. But I think a lot of the people that buy into some of the messaging are doing it from a pretty, from a good position, from a good standpoint. They're attracted to the good of that they want to see Americans do well. They want the country to prosper. They want that American pride. It's not necessarily about shunning other people for them, but it is about this sort of thing. It's the reason why I think this resonates with a lot of people is because, hey, let's bring those jobs back here and let's let Americans do the work. I mean, I'm kind of in the Dave Chappelle camp, which is, I don't want that job. I'm trying to wear Nikes. I ain't trying to make them. It's but I mean, really, it's but on the other hand, I think they get caught up in that mindset of, hey, if we could bring manufacturing of clothing back to America, that would be awesome. Yeah, but what would you be able to afford? And it's not necessarily, and people automatically go to sweatshops. And I'm not saying we should. I'm advocating for sweatshops, but because that's not what's happening in most of the clothing companies that are supplying our clothing here. Okay, that's not what's happening. But the way that it's manufactured and the means that they have and the other processes that they have in place, we don't have those anymore.
Right, and that's what I was going to talk about, the fact that, our economy has really shifted. And I think a lot of the people that you're talking about, while they may be well-being in many cases, they're thinking about things as though we were back in the 50s or 60s or something like that, when the reality is, the American economy is now driven by, things that we would really driven much more by white collar sorts of things. This information age that we're in, we can complain about social media and websites and all of this other stuff. But if you think about it, the companies that are really at the forefront of our economy are all data-driven, information-oriented, even if all they're doing is providing a service like, Etsy or something like that. So there's another one out there called Temu that I think a lot of people use.
Temu.
So
Temu.
Is it Temu? It's Temu?
Yeah, Temu. I think, isn't that Chinese?
Okay.
I think Temu's Chinese. Yeah.
It may be. But I just know a lot of people are using, they're using these online services. So much of our life now is defined by that and dominated by that. And that's where we're in. Even if we're talking about international companies, it's still a lot of American dollars are flowing to these companies, and also a lot of American businesses are relying on what these websites, again, whether they are American or Chinese or whatever, these websites and these web-oriented businesses, what they're providing, a lot of people are building businesses around that.
Yeah.
So that's where we are today.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's the reason why when Trump brought this thing up, repeatedly, it's not the first time he's talked about tariffs or even tried them. It's why all the economists and the Nobel Prize winners all said, man, that's never going to work. It's never, you can't make that happen at this point. It's just unrealistic now to think that you can do that. And, but then again, that describes pretty much all of the Trump administration, unrealistic and imagining that they can do certain things that they cannot do. But he's just going to force it because he's this master business negotiator who somehow bankrupted a couple of casinos. All righty, let's slide out. We're going to come back. You know what? We're going to have a guest. And I don't know if it's going to be Doug Jones or if it's going to be Nina Martin from Reveal. And so, you know what? We'll surprise you. So you will be surprised.
But it's definitely going to be one of the two.
It's definitely going to be one of those two.
Yeah,
So, you know what? Gamble amongst yourselves. We'll be back in a minute. Alabama Politics This Week, brought to you by Wind Creek Entertainment. righty, welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon, David Person, and we are happy now to be joined by Reveal's Nina Martin. I know Reveal has been working on a lot of stuff related to the abortion fight and things, and you specifically have, God bless you, covered Alabama's fight against abortion for, oh man, it's been a decade now, right? It's
Yeah.
woo, this man, time flies when you're dealing with awful people. And so, but thank you so much for coming on. I know y'all have some stories coming out here in the next couple of days. But thanks for coming on and talking with us for just a few minutes.
Sure. No, I appreciate your having me. Thank you so much. I love Alabama, and I've been drawn back to it repeatedly. My focus for the last 10 or 11 years has been reproductive justice issues and gender issues. And I've come back over and over again because Alabama is very much a bellwether for the rest of the country. Starts out looking a little bit out there and a lot of reproductive justice and abortion rights, abortion related issues, and then often becomes sort of shows us where things are either heading or could be heading. I was really eager to get back to Alabama again to look at what has been happening there since Roe versus Wade fell in 2022.
Yeah, typically when Alabama is the bellwether for anything, that means the weather is not very well. And that is obviously true in the case of abortion rights across the country. And I guess you said you started in 2014. What kind of got you? What kind of got you into the state at that point? And what did you find?
So I started in Alabama in 2014 because I was then working at ProPublica. I was an investigative reporter covering sex and gender issues there. And I'd been at a conference and I'd met some people there from Alabama or who were also studying Alabama. And they said, Alabama has been doing this thing that other states do, but it's way worse in Alabama than anywhere else. And that is prosecuting pregnant women and new mothers for substance use during pregnancy. And so it was an issue that, wasn't really on a lot of people's radar at the time. There's a certain level of, well, such a small number of women who, are being prosecuted, right, et cetera, et cetera. But there really were a large number I was hearing in Alabama. So I went to take a look. And before and as part of that, of course, I was reading the court documents that were part of the various cases that were going through the courts, and that the state Supreme Court in particular, Alabama Supreme Court. And I found something really interesting in that. I was reading the many of these opinions, and a lot of the opinions were being written by the one that I found most interesting were being written by a judge who became the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, Tom Parker.
Mhm.
And they were very much not what you would expect if you were looking at a case involving a woman who smoked marijuana or used meth during pregnancy and somehow ended up in police custody and being prosecuted. They were all about personhood. And it was fascinating to see how many, and then I, started doing the thing that you do and go back and back. And so my first story actually ended up being about personhood and how Justice Parker was obsessed with he was very vehemently anti-abortion, but he was particularly obsessed with fetal personhood and with the idea of using the fetal personhood as a way to overturn Roe versus Wade, and not just overturn Roe versus Wade, but outlaw abortion in this country completely. And I thought that was really fascinating. There was no body of law in the rest of the country around fetal personhood, but he was basically creating it. And so
Mhm.
that was my first story that sort of showed me, oh my gosh, this is this is very different from what's happening in the rest of the country. And then I went to look at uh, the story that I'd come specifically to look at, which is criminalization of drug use in pregnancy, and found I was working with uh, ProPublica, but also AL.com. And we got all the records and we went through the records, and they hadn't been, even the prosecutors in counties hadn't gone through the records, didn't know how bad how many people were being prosecuted, the bases of the prosecutions, and what was happening to the women who were being arrested and prosecuted. And so we did that reporting. We found that Alabama at that point had arrested, I think, conservatively, almost 500 women. It's double or tripled that in the last 10 years now. It was, we found all kinds of things that we found. Some places were, you know, it didn't even matter whether a woman knew she was pregnant and had been, sometimes she'd been smoking marijuana before she even knew she was pregnant. And then there's a drug test that she doesn't know about, and then she gets thrown into jail, and then she, is kind of in the DHR system and the criminal justice system, which I don't have to tell you, in Alabama is incredibly onerous and
Mm-hmm.
extractive in terms of taking money and everything from people. And so anyway, so that's what I went to do, and when I was working on that story, one of the people, I was looking for prosecutors around the state and to talk to because sorry about this, every county was different,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of what was the matter with this law. Every county could do pretty much whatever it wanted to, and one of the counties that was doing a lot in this area was Marshall County up in northern Alabama. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I reached out to all the prosecutors, and some talked to me and mostly they didn't. But one person who was very willing to talk to me at the time was Steve Marshall, who was the district attorney of Marshall County at that time. And he was really actually very welcoming and very eager to talk to me about this. He was one of the first prosecutors in the state to do this, and basically that he did was take the law that was a meth lab law, that was supposed to be for just prosecuting parents with children who were born and who were making meth in their kitchens or whatever, and turning that and using that against pregnant women, new mothers in his case. So he was very proud of that. And we talked at length for my story a couple of times. And what I remember really at the time was, oh my gosh, this idea, which he was not the only person to talk it this way, um, was that, if you're, that basically punishing women, kind of arresting them and forcing them into drug treatment, and then, forcing them, taking their babies away, maybe if they fail drug treatment, drug court, they end up going to jail, or prison. Maybe they also are left with, or very often they were left with, like, huge fees and fines because, of course, all of this comes out of their own pockets. That this was a form of help. This kind of punishment was actually kind of a form of help because it was helping women, was forcing women to get treatment for themselves, women who were drug users to get treatment, and that was helping them. So I just was always kind of struck by that idea over the years. And then, I did other stories in Alabama over the years. And then, but this idea of like what help means and how little of it there is in some places, and unfortunately in Alabama is one of those places, how rare it is, how scarce it is. Resources, especially if you're poor, especially if you're Black, especially if you're a woman, are scarce. There's so many. There's so, one good example that always gets me is Medicaid. Just to have regular, normal Medicaid, if you're a family of 3 and you live in Alabama, you can only earn the maximum you can earn is $400 a month, which is $4,800 a year, which is 20% of the federal poverty level. It is so low, and welfare even worse. And then there's all these strings attached. It's just kind of constant. I just remember talking to so many women about substance use and their experiences with the law, which
Mm-hmm.
was called the chemical endangerment law, but other issues
Mm-hmm.
as well. And they all sort of said, this is a place that is all stick and no carrot. There's no
Wow.
help for people. It's really, really, really hard. And then if you
Uh,
do ask for help, you're stigmatized. A lot of the help that's available
correct.
comes through religiously affiliated nonprofits and organizations that, have their own rules and so forth. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the situation that I kind of
So,
encountered. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
coming back 10 years later,
yeah.
the lawsuit that I wanted to look at, the case that I wanted to look at
Uh-huh.
was involved Yellowhammer and the West Alabama Women's Center were both, being threatened by Steve Marshall for criminal conspiracy if they helped anybody get abortions out of state after Roe fell. And
Oh.
this idea of prosecuting helpers just struck me as being very important. So
Well,
that's the
Nina, let me ask you
yeah.
a question. Since you're talking about prosecution, this is a good time for this question. Under what circumstances, just let's lay this out in a way that people can be clear once and for all. Under what circumstances is abortion legal in the state of Alabama, if indeed there are any circumstances where it's legal?
It's pretty much totally illegal. The exceptions are there's a medical exception. Medical exceptions it's vague, I believe, and in most states that have medical exceptions, um, those exceptions are very un they're exceptions in name only because the penalties for for performing an abortion in Alabama without, in violation of the law are so stringent. I think it's up to life in prison in Alabama if you're a provider who does an abortion, that no provider wants to take that risk. And so
So to be clear, Nina, you're saying that even if the mother's life is in danger, it's illegal.
well, if the mother's life is in danger, Steve Marshall and a lot of people would say, no, it's not illegal. That's the one time that it's legal. But the reality is that actually that it's up to a lot of doctors and providers will not provide an abortion until the mother is on death's door because they are worried that they will be prosecuted for performing an illegal abortion. And you've seen what the result of that is in Texas, in Georgia, where where women have died as a result of the abortion bans there, in those two states because providers at a bunch of different hospitals, so not just one hospital, but around the state, over and over again, are reluctant to perform abortions, even for when a woman is suffering a life-threatening medical emergency, because they're afraid that they will be reported and that they will lose their license,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
you hear a lot of
get
about
thrown in jail.
the ectopic pregnancies, which are not viable, and they
Right,
still won't perform the abortion until
Right.
there is a medical need, is what
right,
they describe.
right.
And by the point you reach a medical need, you are in. So the women are in. Not I say you, but it's obviously these women are in medical need to a point where they're in agony in a lot of
Yeah.
cases,
Well,
and
not just in agony, they're in sepsis sometimes. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the 2 most
Mm-hmm.
common causes of, that have been found associated with maternal deaths of women since around abortion bans are hemorrhage. You bleed out. That's what you're gonna die. You're gonna bleed out if you have an ectopic pregnancy, or, sepsis. And sepsis is, if you have a miscarriage and say it's a miscarriage that's close to the viability. So let's say it's in your second trimester. Doctors in a lot of places are just unwilling to do the standard of care for that miscarriage because which is just to do which is basically clean out the uterus with a surgical technique that is called a DNC because they're afraid that they'll be accused of doing that the fetus might have a heartbeat and they'll be accused of doing an abortion. And
Uh-huh.
very often what ends up happening is that in those cases, and you saw this in Georgia with a case of Amber Thurman, that women develop infections. You have any tissue in your body that shouldn't be there, and your body fights it and you develop an infection. That infection turns to sepsis. Sepsis is really deadly.
So that then means next logical conclusion is that for many Alabama women, they going or maybe for all Alabama women who are looking to have an abortion for whatever reason, that they're going to try to leave the state to do so if they have the resources, if they have the opportunity to do so. Now, where do we stand legally on that? What's the, because I know at one point in time, Nina, there was real serious discussion about prosecuting women who leave the state to have an abortion and prosecuting those who help them to leave. Where do we stand on that?
So where we stand, that's the story I came in to take a look at. On the day that Roe fell, um, abortion providers and abortion, the West Alabama Women's Center in Tuscaloosa, and abortion advocates like Yellowhammer Fund had a plan that was, and they thought they were going to get people out of state. No longer allowed in Alabama. We will get those women who need abortions out of state. And that day, they heard from their lawyers who said, no, don't do that. Uh, and also from a lawmaker, don't do that because this Attorney General's office is going to prosecute you under the state's criminal conspiracy law. And if you help women get out of state, they are going to prosecute you under this 1896 law, the criminal conspiracy law that had most people didn't even know existed, but they
Mm-hmm.
were going to prosecute. So on that day, not only did Alabama women lose the right to abortion under the law, they also in the state under the trigger law that went into effect that day, passed in 2019, they also lost effectively the right to get help to go out of state because those the providers, abortion providers, they felt the sting of the wrath of Alabama prosecutors and authorities in the past, and as did Yellowhammer, and they just knew that they would be targeted, and their people would be targeted, and their patients and their clients would be targeted, so they stopped. So that was the state of things in Alabama for almost 3 years. In other states, it, lots of women ended up going out of state. In the first year after Roe, it was like 171,000 women ended up going from one state to the next to get abortions because they couldn't access them in their own state. The other thing you saw, and I think this has really been happening in Alabama too, is lots and lots and lots of women accessing abortion pills through the mail. And so that's probably been, so one of the things that has been kind of amazing about this 2.5 year period is that despite the fact that 12 states have laws that are just as bad, if not slightly worse than Alabama's, near or complete bans, abortions in this country have gone up. And that is because abortion pills have become really so much more accessible than they ever used to be, for lots of reasons that we won't go into, and because abortion advocates in abortion banned states have done what Alabama's folks thought they were going to do too, which is to get people out of state, to help them get to Illinois or help them get to Kansas now, or some Washington D.C., some place where they could access a safe and legal abortion. Only in Alabama were abortion providers told, and former abortion providers and abortion helpers like Yellowhammer Fund told, can't do that, stop that. So they stopped that. What happened? They filed suit after a year, and that lawsuit was actually just decided finally after 2.5 years. And the Yellowhammer and West Alabama Women's Center and the other providers in it, sorry, made the argument that their constitutional rights were being violated, that their patients' and clients' constitutional rights were being violated, free speech rights, right to travel. And something that we don't really even think about, which is a fundamental right that's like a human right, which is the right to give help and to receive help. And Steve Marshall fought that in court. His office fought that in court. It dragged on for a year and a half, almost 2 years. The judge, who was Judge Myron Thompson, who's very much an advocate for, well, I can't, he was
Progressive.
clearly on the side of the
Yeah,
women,
progressive
of
judge, yeah.
Yellowhammer and abortion rights. And he made it clear about last year that he was probably going to rule in the favor of the abortion advocates. But then another 9 months passed. And so then finally, they got together. He called a hearing and said, I'm doing it at the end of the month. And he issued his ruling at the end of the month. And it was a sweeping, clear 100%, almost 100% victory for abortion rights advocates in the state. So now in Alabama, it is again legal to to uh, to access, or it was always. It is now possible. It was probably always legal, but he had his thread. The thread is gone, that he's been blocked, and he hasn't appealed, very importantly. So in Alabama, it is once again possible for former abortion providers and abortion helpers to help get women out of state, to give them information, to give them money, to give them plane tickets, to drive them, whatever they need to access abortion care else out of the state. That's now possible again in Alabama.
Myron Thompson should receive a statue somewhere in this state for saving us from our own stupidity so many times. I
Yep.
mean, it
I've
is
heard that.
remarkable how much. I mean, as somebody who's lived here, and I've
Yeah.
met Myron Thompson, Judge Thompson, a number of times, and love him. But he has saved us from a lot of stuff. And somebody else I wanted to bring up is the late Mia Raven. Who worked at
Yeah.
Yellowhammer Fund and, was a friend of mine, knew her well
Okay.
and passed away, in the midst of this. And I remember having conversations with her where she was still, her and a lot of people at Yellowhammer were still trying to work behind the scenes on the, keep it quiet, to help women, and deal with a lot of these things that were going on. And I don't think people fully appreciate it. I wonder, I'll bring this up because I was going to ask you if this is part of the story, because I know this is going to air. The podcast comes out on Saturday,
Right.
and you have some other stories as well coming out. And I was just wondering how much of that kind of there was almost an underground effort around the state. I know Mia was part of that, and I know some of the other folks at Yellowhammer have been. Is any part of that part of this story about how these people continued to try to help people, even though the threat remained, even though the lawyers kept saying, "Hey, you can't do this publicly, you can't do this, this and that," but those folks never stopped.
So my story does not really talk about that because
Okay,
I'm on the radio and they don't want to talk about that, right? The
sure.
last thing we didn't know when I
Yeah.
was working on the story when the ruling would come down, and what it would be.
Right.
They thought they were probably going to win, but they might not win, and could easily have been that Steve Marshall would have challenged, would have filed an appeal and gotten it blocked, and so I focused on, though, the work that other really important work that they have been doing over this period, which is, they call it family justice work.
Mhm.
And this idea is that, and the idea is basically, well, what happens when you live in a state and you can't help women get abortions? How do you transform your mission into helping women who can't get abortions? That's a really important problem that actually is probably something that a lot of abortion advocacy groups around the country should be thinking about, because so much of the focus, is amongst on the reproductive rights side, is on helping people get abortions. Okay, we can't do it in Alabama. We can't do it in Florida. We can't do it in Texas. Get them someplace else. Send them to Colorado. Send them to New Mexico. Well, okay, so then they get their abortion, and then what else? They go back home, and they're just as poor, they're just as under-resourced, they have all the same problems, and so the folks at Yellowhammer really kind of understood that because, I never knew Mia Raven, but I've the her one of the people who I've gotten to know a bunch of those people now, including Janice Fountain, who is the current executive director, her colleagues, Kelsey McLean and Shaquila Sunlin, and just a whole amazing group of advocates doing this work. And they have really tried to make an effort to try to do that, to sort of figure out, okay, we're in this state. women can't get out of the state. And it was even when they could get out of the state, even when it was legal to help us, it was hard. It was incredibly hard to get them out of state. So how do we help them while we're here? And that's really what they've been spending a lot of the last 2.5 years trying to figure out how to do. Kind of um, uh, reach out to, there was just a tour that we went on, the most recent tour out in, a lot of it was in rural Alabama, but a lot of it was in public housing communities sort of scattered around Alabama that are very difficult to find, as it turns out. There's not like a list on the state website, apparently. And they took a bus that they called the Repro Raven, after Mia Raven, and they loaded up with stuff. They loaded up with supplies and safe sex kits and diapers from newborn to adult. They loaded up with emergency contraception. They loaded up with information. They get some food. If in the morning it might be donuts, at lunch it's sandwiches. They drive out to all these small communities to kind of give them free supplies and make connections with those communities so that people in places that don't have Wi-Fi, that never thought about, don't yellowhammer, what does that mean? It's a bird, right? Um, you know, uh, what helping them understand that there is a network that can help them if they need contraception, if they need support of any kind. We're here to help you, and that has been a big part of what Yellowhammer has also been trying to do. So whatever they're doing underground, which they don't want to talk about for reasons that
Sure.
are very understandable, um, what they're doing above ground is trying to expand the idea of what an abortion fund and an abortion helper should be. Same thing with West Alabama Women's Center. When they were told they could no longer perform abortions, they stopped like that day in mid, if you hadn't taken your pill that day, sorry, you couldn't take it there. You couldn't get it there, couldn't take it there. And then they transformed themselves into an all service women's health clinic that does everything but abortion. That provides prenatal care and postpartum care and doula support and birth control and STI testing and all that stuff that people need in addition to abortions. Abortion being just the one little thing. And the folks at West Alabama Women's Center, which used to be owned by Yellowhammer until Dobbs, they talk about how exciting it is to be able to support something besides in addition to abortion, right? So that I think that Alabama, in the way that it's a bellwether, is also a bellwether for that a little bit. Like the work that's been going on in Alabama over the last couple of years around how do you help people who can't get abortions is really important and uh, a real model for what other groups in other states might need to be doing in the future.
Yeah, it's always striking to me that in a lot of these stories I've worked on some, and you highlight some terrible actions by some people, but you often find that there are so many more good people that are doing really really good work, and that sounds like what we're going to kind of get to here as well is listen, this has been a bad period, but listen, look at all these good people who are doing good work and trying to help people and doing everything they can to stay within the laws and still provide the support and the help for very vulnerable women and people out there that really need their help. But Nina, what is it? Just go to the podcast, go to download and subscribe. How can
You
folks
can
listen or watch, or
You
can they?
can
Is it?
download it wherever in all the usual
Yeah.
places, and you can also, depending on your local community and their schedule, you can hear it on NPR. It's usually airs starting Friday or Saturday on NPR stations around the country, about 500 of them.
Oh, good deal. Good deal. That's also NPR. Got to protect that as well.
Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Never thought I'd have to say that, but honestly, this is where we are, I guess.
This is where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Nina, thank
Hmm.
you so much for honestly for the work that you've done, first of all, and then coming on and spending some time to tell us about it, and hopefully we can spread the message around and let folks know that there's a story out there about how good some Alabamians can be.
Oh my God, such great people we met and such important work. So thank you for letting me for having me on and letting me tell you the story of my story.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
That is Nina Martin with Reveal. Y'all check it out. Go to the websites. Download the podcast. Subscribe. It wouldn't kill you. It's free. So don't subscribe. Come on. All right. While you're there subscribing to ours, subscribe to theirs too. Okay. Do this. No, come on. All righty. We're going to slide out of here. We'll come back in just a minute and wrap this up. It's Alabama Politics This Week. Back in a minute. Alrighty, welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon, David Person, and we are happy, as always, whenever we can slide in some time with our favorite U.S. Senator, Doug Jones. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Oh, guys, I'm doing great. It's great to be back with you. I hope y'all are well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We see you around on MSNBC and other places, and always with very informed and factual takes on what's happening in the world. And God, we missed that in the Senate. It sure would be nice. But I kind of wanted to get you on because I know you were at the protest in Tuscaloosa last week, and I guess just kind of give a feel for what happened over there with a protest and what the vibe was, I think, around town with Trump visiting.
Well, Josh, it was really good. There was a lot of energy, and I try to tell folks, and with all due respect, I don't think it was just a protest. I mean, yeah, we were protesting, but this was really a rally. This is really a movement that's happening, I think, around the country, where people are now recognizing exactly what's going on. We were talking before we went on here about how just it seems like every hour you get hit with something that is as much as misdirection as anything else. But the fact of the matter is people are afraid. They're scared. They're concerned about where we are headed right now. And that Donald Trump is concerned about it too, because he has completely changed his tune about the economy. He's gone from the golden age and prices are going to immediately come down and the economy is going to be the greatest it's ever been and everybody was going to get rich, to telling young children that they can only have $2 and a couple of pencils. And he has really, really dumbed down, is the only way to say it, his rhetoric about the economy. So last week in Tuscaloosa, you had a lot of people who were there to stand up, to speak out, and to let this president know that not everything is good. They do not believe him. That they are not seeing the things that in some cases that people voted for. Beto O'Rourke came in and gave a great talk. I'm hoping he'll run for the Senate again in Texas. But I think across Tuscaloosa, the vibe was, on the one hand, the president's coming. On the other hand, oh my God, the president's coming. Why the hell is he coming to Alabama? And what was really funny, I saw Joe Goodman's article on AL.com quoting the young guy who was so excited, and there was hope in the air because Nick Saban was was the one who was going to be talking at commencement. So it was I just really enjoyed the day. It was great being out with folks and to see the excitement from young to old and all. I looked out of that crowd and it looked like Alabama.
Yeah. The last time Trump was president, we had kind of a similar, maybe not as good of a buildup of Democrats and resistance and just it felt like there was some momentum that built up over the course of those 4 years to get him the hell out of office and to help Democrats up and down the ballot. And so with that happening in Tuscaloosa, and you see the energy that's there, I know it's happened in other places. There have been rallies in Huntsville, huge rallies in Huntsville. There were some in Montgomery not too long ago as well. Is that something that Democrats in Alabama can build on? And the second question is, are they building on it?
Well, here the answer to the first question is absolutely yes. We built on my election in 2017. We built on that, with a lot of great people running in 2018. The problem in 2018 was that everybody, because I had won in 2017, everybody thought they could win. We had flipped Alabama blue, which was not the case. And I kept going, oh my God, please time out. That's not the case. Understand what you're doing. But we had some really good candidates that showed up. Walt Maddox was actually very competitive in that governor's race. After the election in 2020 and then going into 2022, we completely faltered. We just weren't competitive. But I think that what you feel out there is a momentum right now with Democrats from one end of the state to the other. There is a palpable feeling of energy out there. And it is time that we can not only build as Democrats, but we can also persuade those more independent voters, the voters who don't vote very often, and others to kind of, we need to do something different here. We need to, Jesus, I hate to quote George Wallace, but you essentially need to send some folks a message around here. And so, yes, I do believe that Democrats on a local level, and you guys know how careful I am parsing my words here, that Democrats on a local level are being energized and they are working in their local communities to try to get folks engaged. I expect on Sunday, May the 18th, for anybody that's listening down there, I'm going to be in Fairhope to do kind of a thing with the Democrats, maybe even a town hall. I'm going to be in Anniston. I expect good crowds, just like we had, maybe not the 1,500 that we had up in Tuscaloosa, but that energy is out there, and people are looking for alternatives. And I think that making sure people stand up and let folks in the state of Alabama, local officials in the state of Alabama that are in office now, saying, do not take us for granted, that we either won't vote or we're going to vote for you. I think that momentum is growing. Not that the Democrats are going to sweep the state or even come close. We may not even win statewide races. Who knows? But we're going to build some momentum and we're going to start getting competitive.
I'm glad to hear you speak with such optimism about the momentum shift. I sense it also here in Madison County. But Doug, I did want to ask you, speaking of where things stand with the Democratic Party, I wanted to know where things stand with you and the Alabama Democratic Party leadership. There was that kerfuffle that happened earlier, and it appears as though it was resolved with the apology that Randy Kelly issued. Is that the case as far as you're concerned?
As far as that issue was concerned, the fact that he issued a letter that was absolutely false and defamatory, and he did what he needed to do under the law to withdraw it. So yeah, that issue, when he issued that letter acknowledging that it was wrong, that was not correct, that issue got to put to bed. I still have issues with the leadership of the Alabama Democratic Party, or the lack thereof. Okay. I mean, I've still got serious, that's not a secret. It's there. I think it's palpable. Anybody that watched or listened in or understood what happened at the party meeting would know that. And so that's why I think that, look, the Democratic Party has often in the past been only a vehicle for folks to be able to get their name on the ballot. There's a couple of the staffers doing a really good job, I think, of trying to hold people together, recruit some candidates, assist people that are coming out that might want to run for office. And I appreciate the fact that they're doing that. But the party itself is a vehicle to get your name on the ballot. Where the rubber meets the road, David, and this has been true of the Democrats for a long, long time, is that at the local level, we have got to strengthen our counties. We've got to strengthen our local clubs. We've got to get into the local communities, because the greatest thing that the Democrats could do at this point, it would be wonderful to win statewide elections. Don't get me wrong. But it's also going to be wonderful to just be competitive statewide if we can do it. But where we really have to focus, ruthlessly focus, is on some of our House and Senate districts where we've got a chance to win. Democrats have got to focus on breaking the supermajority in this legislature so that they can really have an effective voice. Right now, we have legislators doing a great job of trying to get the word out there. They can actually get a little bit done when they work with their counterparts, but not much. They know that to be effective, we've got to break that supermajority in at least one house of the legislature. And that's where I think Democrats really need to focus. And that is on the local level. That doesn't necessarily mean the state party. That's what local Democrats can do and really hone in, because I'm going to tell you guys, there's a lot of ammunition to use out there right now against this legislature and against the whether it's the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, but particularly members of the legislature with some of the crap that they did in Montgomery.
Yeah, give us a couple of examples of that, if you don't mind.
Well, a lot of it was their messaging. First of all, I think this legislature is absolutely trying to kill public education in this state. They are taking tax dollars, that hard-earned tax dollars, and they're creating this situation where people who have been sending their kids to private schools for years, not just their new choice to go to a potentially better private school, but have been sending them to private schools for years, in part, David, and you know this, in part because they were just segregation academies, okay? And they did not want to go to a public school where it is much more diverse. And so they're literally trying to destroy public education. There's no question about that. Second of all, if you mention the word Medicaid around the Alabama legislature, they literally close the lids of their desk on top of their head. They will move as quickly away from that issue as possible. We still have hundreds of thousands of people in Alabama that need health insurance, and it's only going to get worse in this Republican regime. It is only going to get worse. But will this legislature do anything to save rural hospitals, to save doctors that are coming? No, absolutely not. They're not going to do that. We are losing OBGYNs. We're just hemorrhaging OBGYNs, and we can't get doctors to come into Alabama. Hospitals are going to close. Our Alabama Hospitals Association has done a wonderful job of educating the legislators, but it just goes in one ear and out the other. So those are just a couple of things. I mean, look, Alabama has done a really good job over years attracting industry, but has that industry then filtered down to the folks in Alabama? Has it really ever filtered down? We are still one of the poorest states in the country. We've got some incredible businesses in manufacturing. So why are we still in low unemployment? Why is it that we are still one of the poorest states? I think the 9th poorest state in the country. We can't get people out to vote. We're still in the lower echelon. We're in the lower 50% of voter turnout because it's hard to vote. So look, I just think, and what I'm hoping is that on a local level, that Democrats will focus as much as anything on their local House and Senate races and come after these folks. Make them stand up and defend some of the crazy stuff that they've done. And there's some of these legislatures that, and I don't have any off the top of my head, that have introduced some really just nuts bills, just MAGA right, that has no business. Our legislature wants to fight culture wars more than they want to work for the people of Alabama. And we need to start holding them accountable.
Those are excellent points, Doug. Excellent points. One final question from me. When Ken Martin was on with us, the DNC chair, he was unequivocal in saying that Alabama was going to be a priority. I want to know from your perch, if you think from what you're seeing that is indeed going to be a case, that from here on out, Alabama and the DNC are going to have a healthier relationship, and one from which this state will benefit, so that we can see actually some of the things you're talking about actually happen.
Well, all things are relative, David. Will it be healthier than what it's been in the past? Sure, but that bar is really pretty damn low. Okay, um, and I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, I take Ken at his word, and I think it will be better, but it's got to be more than better. Okay, I mean, look. I know the term out there with a lot of folks is one that they reel from, but we need a little affirmative action plan for states like Alabama. Okay,
Hmm.
we need to
Mhm.
get a little more help than some of these other states if we're to build the proper infrastructure. And I don't see that happening. This state, they're not going to see as a competitive state right now. But I will say this. Again, I think that one of the major issues I think with the DNC is they're too fractured. You've got the DNC, but then you've also got a separate entity called the DCCC, which manages the House of Representative races. Then you've got the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and those two kind of work together, but they also work independently. And that's just not a good way to do things. Republicans don't do it that way. And I don't think it's a good way for Democrats to do it. What I do see happening out there right now, and I think this is taking a little bit of time, but I think it's important to take a little bit of time. I do think that there are a number of different conversations, let me put it that way, going on where the DNC will be just a part of a bigger movement because there are a lot of conversations out there going on, of which, quite frankly, I'm a part of a number of them, to try to do something to get the Democratic brand to be better across the country. And that includes understanding and focusing on the South, the Rust Belt, and areas of the state that of the country that we have been so lacking. If you look at the maps, and I've got some of these, I could send you guys sometime, of areas of the 2024 election. If you go back, 4 election cycles, or go back to Bill Clinton, and you look at the various counties that were won by the Democratic candidate for president, and put them in blue and the ones in red for the Republican candidate, you will see that over time, those blue dots diminished in number. It is incredible how we've just abandoned the heartland and the South, and that there are no areas. And that is in part because of populations that go to the cities. We're still winning a lot of things, but the population shifts are different. And Democrats have recognized, and the groups I'm working with are going to be more of a 50-state strategy, more of a 50-state messaging to try to get the Democrats to understand that it's that center that is where the power is. It is the center where we have the ability to persuade, because right now, the Republican Party is dominated. Unlike the Democrats, where we've got loud voices on the left, the Republican Party is dominated by the far, far right. And that gives, I think, Democrats opportunities that we haven't had in a long time. But it's opportunities to build across the spectrum, from across educational, race, religion, you name it, urban versus and rural. All of those things give, I think, Democrats incredible opportunities. So I hope Ken is correct, but there's going to be a lot of other efforts as well that I think will help boost Democrats in Alabama and elsewhere in the South.
It seems as if right now they're just bouncing around the different social medias, and looking at what becomes popular with a lot of people. It seems that there are a lot of people. There's a large swath of people, especially younger people, who don't really identify necessarily with either party, who don't really get sucked into a lot of the more, the really political talk, but they are swayed by a more of a workers' rights type message. And there are a lot of people with accents like mine out there who have become very popular on, say, TikTok or some of these other places, and spreading a message of, hey, we got to stop this shit where we're just, yelling and screaming back and forth, and we're not helping each other, and a message of, being country used to mean that you helped each other out, and now we're just criticizing everybody and piling on everybody, and such a message seems almost ready made for Democrats, but. Kind of like you with a little bit of skepticism, it seemed. I'm the same way. I don't really see that from a national level. It's doesn't. And maybe there was a poll, and I think Carville talked about it last year, where they interviewed a number of different Democrats and asked them how many of them owned a pickup truck or knew somebody who owned a pickup truck. And, I mean, the numbers were shockingly low among the upper echelon of the Democratic Party. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem where you don't know people who are living this life.
Yeah.
And, how do you change that?
Well, look, first of all, just for the record, Josh, I have two pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the record,
Yeah.
just saying. Okay.
I got one myself. Yeah.
Okay, I feel a little left out of the pickup truck club, but okay.
David, we
All right.
always knew you were one of those elites,
That's right. Over there with his Prius, a jacked up Prius that he's got.
Yeah, very much not, but okay.
Josh, it's a great question, but I can it's the question that I think Democrats have been asking themselves a lot since the 24 election, because that 24 election was a long time coming, and it was in part because we weren't reaching folks where they are, we weren't talking, we weren't listening as much, and that's a lot of the conversations that are going on now, and it's not just messaging. We've got to understand how to reframe some of the things that we stand for, to make sure that people can get those messages. We got to reframe those in ways that makes it personal. I don't know if I've said this on one of your previous broadcasts or not, but I'm now convinced that all politics is personal. Okay. Tip O'Neill used to say all politics was local. Well, it's a little more national now than it is local. But the one thing 2024 proved is that all politics is personal. And that doesn't mean in a selfish way. That's not a negative way. It just means that people want to understand and know what you're going to do for them and their families and their children. And are they going to have better opportunities? They want to work for themselves. They don't want handouts, but they want to have the government be responsive to them. And I don't think Democrats have done a very good job about that. In all candor, I think Democrats have focused too much on identity politics, in their emphasis, not in a way that explains that when you are focused on trying to help lift one boat, you're lifting all boats. That's where we've fallen down. We seem to have said that we want to help this group, and what somebody is hearing is, well, they're not going to help me, which is not the case at all. And I think
Right.
Democrats are looking now at making sure their messaging, that people understand that it's Democrats who brought us rural hospitals. It's Democrats that brought TVA and electricity. It's Democrats that brought Redstone Arsenal. It's Democrats that brought us out of the recession, gave us Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, gave us those safety nets that are needed without just being a handout, but giving those safety nets. I'll tell you the other thing, though, guys, that Democrats have got to focus on, and if we don't, it doesn't matter what the messages are, and that is we've got to figure out new vehicles for our message. The young people, Josh, that you were describing, it's not that they don't care. They're just not tuned into the news. They don't particularly care for politics. They're not tuned into the news, so they're not listening to legacy media like CNN or MSNBC or even Fox. They're doing other things, and they're getting their information in different ways. And they get information, not news. And we've got to figure out how to get messages in that information space, whether it is social media, whether it's podcasts like yours or others, whether it is through TikTok. somebody on Fox News, Jesse Waters, who I rarely quote, said recently that Democrats were still operating in the 1990s when it comes to messaging. And I quoted him on that, but I disagreed with it. We're not operating in the 1990s. We're operating in the 1890s. Okay, we're anticipating. We think if we get an op-ed in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times, that we're reaching people. That if we get on CNN or MSNBC, we're reaching people. We're not. We are absolutely not. And that's a big challenge, I think, for Democrats, because that infrastructure is not out there for Democrats. It's like my buddy Joe Trippi, my political guy, always says, every 2 years during elections, what happens is Republicans have owned the airways. They have the infrastructure. They have all of the media, social media, and the mainstream media. They have all of that. They've got radio. They've got TV. They own the airwaves, and Democrats just rent it to try to do a couple of commercials. We've got to get out there, and I think that today's media world gives us those opportunities if we'll take advantage of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all, and it's not just that they own a lot of the media; it's the type of media that they own. It's I mean, Fox News is essentially an arm of the RNC at this point. I mean,
Sure.
really, they're over there giving advice to the president and talking about messaging and and strategies and stuff. And Democrats don't have anything close to that. I mean, MSNBC is a real news station. I mean, yes, they lean a little more progressive on certain things, but they're still journalists that are given equal time to both sides and all that. Fox News doesn't care about equal time to both sides, and they're just spreading a message of whatever the RNC wants to talk about, and that's a problem.
And Josh, more important, in my view, even more important than that, and you're absolutely right, is especially in a state like Alabama, where local news has all but gone away.
Yep.
Okay. We don't have the same number of local papers. We've got a few dailies in Alabama that are bigger, but nobody really gets the kind of local news when you have to click on it. All right. You don't have that local paper that you're picking up at the newsstand every day to see what's happening in your community. And some of the local radio and TV are even bought, owned by these national syndicates now. And you can only look, you guys go check. And any Sinclair broadcasting station, and I know we've got at least a couple of them in Alabama, you can take a lot of the national stories that their anchors are saying here in Alabama, and you can just substitute them anywhere in the country. And they are giving a message. It is a subtle message, but it is a message nonetheless. And Democrats have nothing to compete with on that level now. So we're trying. That's another thing that a lot of these groups that I'm talking about, it's a lot of what they're looking at and trying to do and treating. There's a new social media platform called says.us that folks ought to check out, because it is going to be one that rewards civility and engagement, and not just the hate-filled rhetoric that you see coming on X these days,
Yeah.
and that seems to be drifting over some even to blue sky.
Yeah. Well, listen, we'll get you out of here on this. I know you got to run, you got other commitments and stuff, but I did want to ask one thing, kind of bringing it back around to the state.
Don't even go there. I know where you're going.
No, yeah, well, we're gonna go. We got to go because there's gonna be there needs to be somebody at the top of the ticket in 2026 that drives this thing. I mean, whether or not there's an opportunity for first of all, I think there may be, if your old nemesis Tommy Tuberville runs, there may be some legal opportunities for a victory. But if not, even regardless of that, I think that we've got to have somebody at the top of the ticket. I believe, and a couple of somebodies actually. I think there ought to be somebody running for AG, somebody running for lieutenant governor, somebody running for governor that drives people to the polls to help those down ballot races that we talked about, those important legislative races and other things. So, do you know anybody who might be interested in that?
Look, I think you're right. First of all, if we could find good candidates at the top, and look, we have to be candid that the Democratic Party bench is not as strong as it should be, because one person, Josh, or even two can't drive that per se. You've got to have some down ballot races. That's why I'm talking about recruiting for state house and state senate. You're going to see, I think, some pretty good candidates coming out of the Democrats right now that are going to challenge some of these Republican members of Congress that may not have gotten challenged before. And the goal there is as much, to win, but also just to be competitive. And that's what you've got. I know where you're going, and I appreciate it very much. I'm going to tell you, just like I've said over the last couple of weeks, when all this came out about Tuberville, and I agree with you, by the way. And I don't know if you heard my comment in Tuscaloosa. I never even have to finish it, but I kept talking about the cuts of the federal government and the cuts to the Department of Education, and said, if there was one person in the state of Alabama that could benefit from the Department of Education, and the crowd knew exactly where I was going. I'm going to stay in this fight. Okay. And I think it is a fight right now. It is a fight for the heart and soul of America, for the heart and soul of Alabama. I've got a lot going on. I am looking how best to stay in that fight with the groups that I'm working with on a national level, the groups I'm working with on a state level. I'm going to stay in this fight one way or another. What that means at this point, I can't say. And I truly can't say. It's not that I'm not prepared to say, it's I really can't say. I want to see how things go. And for someone like me, it's still a little early because of the dynamics are such that I don't necessarily wouldn't have to need the same kind of prep that others do. But I want to stay in the fight, and I also want to help. I want to help anybody that can be competitive in these districts. But again, I go back to something. And that is, Democrats have to be ruthless in their efforts to win certain elections. And that means focusing on elections, on some races to the detriment maybe of others. But we got to try to figure out how to break those supermajorities. That to me is the most critical factor. And I want to help out doing that somehow, some way. So staying in the fight and not answering your questions.
Yeah. Listen, you can say not answered, but I heard you running. So, all right, that is future Governor Doug Jones, and we do appreciate you, man. I know you slid us in here, and we thank you so much for coming on. It's always great. The stuff is always gold, and we really do appreciate you.
Well, thanks, guys. I always enjoy it. Always enjoy being with you. Keep up the good work.
All right, thank you. That is former Senator Doug Jones, and we're going to come back in just a minute, wrap this thing up. It's Alabama Politics This Week. We're back in a minute. All righty, welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon, David Person. Thanks to our very fine guests, Nina and Doug, for coming on, spending some time. Thanks to the folks at Wind Creek Entertainment for their sponsorship, and really appreciate all they do. Look forward to having Arthur Mothershed on with us next week for a little bit of information about what's going on with the tribe and with gambling in the state. Also, thanks to folks at SPLC. We're also going to have with us some artists next week from SPLC that they're taking part in a project that they're doing with the Civil Rights Memorial down there. Should be a fun show as always. I mean, listen, this is what we do. We put together, really a fantastic product that we give away for free.
Yes.
And
you're the ringmaster of fun. I'll give you that.
That's what you and one 7-year-old agree. Okay, you and one 7-year-old agree. All right, before we slide out of here, I wanted to bring up a couple of things. One, Tommy Tuberville still kicking around the idea of joining the governor's race, as we talked about with Doug. One thing we didn't really get into is, I think that, like David Cole, the former representative of the state who ended up going to jail for a brief period of time because he tried to lie about his residency. I think Tommy Tuberville could be standing at the top of a pretty slippery slope if he keeps pushing this thing. Because I think if somebody were to get him in front of or into a deposition under oath, and then forced him to turn over his tax returns and things, I think he could be looking at a problem. I don't think he's got them. I think if he had them, we would already know. I think he would have put them on the table at this point. But I think that creates a pretty big problem for Tommy Tuberville, because he is voting in Alabama over the course of the last few years. And so I think if he keeps pressing this thing, and there is a challenge to it, and that challenge winds up in a Montgomery courtroom where a Montgomery judge is making the determinations. They don't much care about Republican politics in Montgomery. And so they're going to just follow the law. And the law is going to say that you got to turn this stuff over. And if he turns over some stuff that shows that he was voting in Alabama while he was living in Florida,
gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think he's in a very tenuous position that for whatever reason, arrogance or narcissism or whatever it is, has blinded him to. I also think this, and this is not an original idea of mine. Doug Jones was actually chatting with us after our interview with him, and he said something that I thought was pretty on point that I don't think Tuberville is considered, and that is, if he actually were to become governor of Alabama, he'd have to live here. He couldn't live in Florida. He couldn't spend his days at his weekdays in Florida.
Yeah, it's not a commuter's position.
Palm Beach,
that's
right. The Palm Beach mansion down there, or wherever he is in Florida. He'd have to actually live in the governor's mansion here.
Yeah.
Is he going to be willing to do that?
Well, I think the better question is his wife going to be willing to do that? Because it's my understanding that right now that's kind of a holdup. And listen, I get it, man. Let me tell you something right now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If I was living on the beach in a nice little house on the beach, I mean, it's a $6 million house that he's got down there, $6 million, whatever it is. It's a nice place, okay? If I was living in that house and you come and told me that you're going to take a job and I got to move to Montgomery from my beach house, man,
right.
No, sir. You're going to have to fight me, okay? All right, that's... all right, we're gonna be fighting over that. I mean,
and what's the old saying, Josh? Happy wife, happy life.
That's right. Yeah. It's
even as long as the Tubervilles I'm assuming, have been together.
Yeah.
Happy wife, happy life still applies.
That's right. Mad wife, you in some shit. Okay. You ain't watching no more games. All right, that's it. You turn
that's
the ball
least
game
of your
off.
problems.
That's exactly right. You can be spending all your Saturdays at the pumpkin patch, brother.
And all your nights on the couch.
That's right. That's right. No. All righty. Before we slide out of here, let's do our right wing nut. Our right wing nut this week is Pam Bondi, our current AG somehow, and her emperor has fantastic clothes little spiel that she went through over the last week that was well documented. If you can search it out, find it. The Daily Show did just a brilliant little montage of her talking on one day, talking about the Trump administration and the DOJ confiscating 20 million plus fentanyl pills, and to her that translated into 20 million lives saved. Fast forward 2 days later, they had still confiscated 22 million pills, but now Trump had saved 119 million lives. Fast forward a day later to the Trump cabinet meeting, the same 22 million pills. Are you ready for this, media? She says, has now translated into Donald Trump personally saving 258 million lives. I'll remind you that there are only 340 million people in the country. Yes.
Thank you. And most of the people are not using fentanyl. So there you have it.
Yeah. Even in their Halloween candy. It's just, as the host of the Daily Show said, at this point, at this rate, death will cease to exist by August if Trump keeps this up. I mean, it's just... I mean, really.
I love it. I love it.
It's just, honest to God, what a show. All righty, we're going to slide out of here. Until next week, y'all be safe out there.
Peace.